Just like we're going live, I am on. It's almost noon, and so I'm waiting for some people to log on here. And remember, if you're logging on, it would be great if you ask some questions. I am getting better every week at actually being able to see them and answer them. So hold on for just a minute, and we'll be going live soon. I see some people are hooking up. People are getting on. All right. This is great. Waiting for it to pop up on my computer page here. Make sure my partner hasn't forgotten so I can log on and do my questions here. And it doesn't look like he's doing it. Okay. Well, we'll see if he logs on or not and whether I can go live. But let's get started. People are getting on, which is great. I'm happy to be here again. This is part of my Health is a Journey series, and today I'm talking about homeostasis. Now I can see who's on and see who's going to be leaving comments and asking me questions. So today we're talking about homeostasis, which is really about self-regulation. And why did I choose to pick that topic today? Well, I've talked about blood sugar, I've talked about Alzheimer's, I've slightly mentioned diabetes and different things, but what I want you to know is that all of these things fall under homeostasis. One of the greatest lessons I have ever learned in the last 30 years or so of being in the health industry is that almost everything that you think of as a chronic disease, and by chronic disease, I want to define this. It basically means something that has been building up for 20 to 30 years. It's something that involves the breakdown of a system in your body. It's something that usually takes decades to develop, although you can do it much quicker depending on your state of health when you start having imbalances and depending on how stressed out you are and how poorly you eat. And now, why has all this come together to create something that, like a chronic disease? Because they all influence how your body defends itself, how it regulates itself, and how then it ultimately breaks down. And the way that homeostasis works is that every single cell and process in your body happens within certain parameters. Your body is a finely tuned machine that knows how to run everything, and it does it precisely, but it depends on certain things being fed into it, nutrition, and it depends on certain energetic patterns that you create with your mind and with your stress and with just the way you handle life in general emotionally. And so any time that you're in an excessive chronic stress or emotional state for prolonged periods of time, it all shuts down. It's all interfered with, so to speak. And any time that you don't give your body the proper nutrition, then your body has to develop some other process by which it compensates for something else that's wrong. Think about the fact that if you follow athletics at all or anything to do with dance or anything, we all know that if you develop a problem with your hip and you don't pay attention to it, you then develop a problem with your knee. And then you develop a problem usually with your ankle, and then you develop all these problems. And you think you have knee problems and ankle problems, and really you just might have a lower back hip problem that you never corrected. But you compensate, and that compensation leads to some other issue going on. Well, this is what happens internally with homeostasis. You're missing certain nutrients, so natural processes don't turn on. They don't go into their normal pattern of keeping you healthy. And then those same processes then take something from somewhere else to compensate. Sometimes it's robbing nutrition from somewhere else or stored nutrition that you have in your body, then uses it up inappropriately or too quickly to correct some other condition in your body. So all of this is going on moment to moment. And your body literally spends most of its time trying to correct an imbalance that you create yourself from the last time that you ate, or the last bit of stress you had that you weren't able to drop and move on from. All these things interfere with how your body processes things and kind of throws a monkey in the wrench of everything. So basically, let's kind of stick just with the nutrition part to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. We talked about how stress interferes with everything. Stress basically blocks the flow of energy and nutrients around your body. In Chinese medicine, it's all about energy and energy flow, and they'll often just tell you almost all disease is caused by stagnant qi. Oh, what is stagnant qi? Basically, it's their concept that energy is not moving between cells, between organs, around your body to keep all the different parts of it in its most vibrant state. So let's say you're stressed out, your digestion doesn't work, so your food's not going through your system the way it should be. Your liver's too tense, which means your nervous system's too amped up. And then you're not digesting the food properly because it holds it there too long. You can get acid reflux. Your heart, you can get heart palpitations in the middle of the night. You can get all these different aspects just due to the fact that you're too stressed. Well, one of the other things that happens when you're too stressed is that you don't absorb nutrients from your food properly. So let's say you're eating a suboptimal diet anyway, and it's lacking in nutrients, and now you've cut the amount of nutrients you're getting out of that poor nutrient food by about 50% because you're stressed out. And you're not absorbing it properly because you got so much tension in your digestive system that it moves through your body too quickly. And so it even cuts down further on that and creates inflammation. Right? So that's just one way that stress is interfering with your system. Besides the fact that you just make poor choices about food when you're stressed out, and if you don't have a program before you go into it, then you're going to eat even worse than you normally do. So then you look at things like blood sugar I talked about. I did a video that showed you how to take your own blood sugar and how that is important. And that's important because one of the main things that throws your entire body off is excessive blood sugar. So oftentimes when you have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, it has nothing to do with genetics, has very little to do with anything you inherited from your parents, other than that most people eat the same diet that their parents did, and that's why they both had type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, in probably at least 90% of the cases, is really just your body's natural reaction to the food that you put in it. So you want to get rid of type 2 diabetes? Change the food that you put in it. Change your level of exercise, change your habits, and all of a sudden, probably within 30 days, you can have a pretty good idea that you can get rid of type 2 diabetes. And it just depends on what you want to feed yourself. And this is the hard part for most people, because most people do not want to change what they put into their body. They become it's almost like an addiction. And so it's really hard for them to make choices to change their diet, because it's one of those, diet is one of those things that most people subconsciously associate with freedom. You know, there's nobody that forces you to eat a certain way, and so just having the freedom to choose any food that you like is something that most people don't ever want to give up. No matter if the fact that they have to end up taking pharmaceutical drugs and they end up killing themselves, it's still a choice that they get to make. And you know, we're kind of programmed to believe that we're born defective, and that's the problem we're having with our diet. It has nothing to do with the fact that you just chose to eat a diet and become addicted to a diet that's high in sugar and high in processed foods that your body just can't handle. And so one of the easiest ways to know that your body cannot handle the food that you're putting into it, and you've disrupted this natural regulatory process called homeostasis, is elevated blood sugar. It's one of the first markers for everything. And then everything kind of trips off of that. So now you have elevated blood sugar for a long period of time. It's easy to test the foods if you have a meter that you might be eating that actually raises your blood sugar too much. all you have to do is be willing to actually go through that process. For most people, it's grains. You lose the ability to process grains when you have elevated blood sugar, and so anytime that you eat those, especially things that are heavily processed, your blood sugar goes way up. You might require medication to get it down, and that trips you off into all these other diseases. The easiest way to test that theory is just stop eating grains. I know for most people, again, it's a pretty outrageous thing to think about, but the reality is that if you do that, then you'll find out that your blood sugar probably naturally drops pretty easily. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't eat grains the rest of your life. That just means that at this moment, your body doesn't do well on it. So you might be able to introduce that later and then be able to get back to having it as part of your diet once in a while. But, the reality is, look at your diet now. You probably have some sort of grain food, mainly bread, that you eat 2 or 3 times a day because it's easy. It's something you can put in your diet quite easily. And you're kind of addicted to it. You've been doing it your entire life. So I'm trying to see if I can find some comments here. So hold on. And looks like I don't. So when you can get a handle on blood sugar, now that's the easiest way to start to make inroads into any health issue you have. Because remember, chronic health issues, we're talking here high blood pressure, diabetes, even Alzheimer's, all these things fall into that chronic health issue. It's something you've been developing for many, many years. But if you can get a handle on the sugar, now you're starting to get a handle on everything else. And just to kind of clarify why I would mention Alzheimer's in the same name as diabetes or high blood sugar, is that it's now known that when you have excessive blood sugar, what you generally have is something called insulin resistance, meaning that your body's no longer listening to the amount of insulin you put out, and so your cells are ignoring it, which means you now have high blood sugar and high insulin. And in that state, that inflammatory state, because both of those things cause inflammation, in that inflammatory state, there's a process in your neurons, the molecules of your neurons, where it either will signal that there's something wrong and we need to get rid of some neurons, or it signals that it's a great environment, we need to grow more and take care of our brain. Well, usually in the presence of high insulin and high blood sugar, it signals that you got too many, and it starts the process of getting rid of them. And so that's just one tiny little fact about high blood sugar. The other thing is that it often just leads into another chronic illness called high blood pressure. Now, high blood pressure can be deadly. If you're someone that's experiencing really high blood pressure, then you need probably to go out and get some medication to drop it down quickly. But that should just be a signal to you that you need to go home and figure out what that's about and then do something to lower it yourself. Because that, again, is just a reaction to everything else that's going on in your system. High blood pressure is just a state of inflammation that's going on in your arteries that causes your pressure to go up. Oftentimes, it could just mean that you have too much plaque in your arteries, meaning that you've shrunk the amount of space that's there for blood to flow through, so it takes more pressure to push that blood through a smaller area. One of the authors I was reading about on stress talked about the fact that when you have too much plaque and you're highly stressed, which makes things constrict, then it's kind of like trying to take the water from a fire hose and shove it through a garden hose. It just takes a lot of pressure and probably something's going to blow. And that's what high blood pressure is about. That can be caused by a lot of things, lack of minerals, magnesium, the inability of your cardiovascular system to just relax. But it often is traced back to a lack of nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide, again, is something that all the cells in your arteries produce. It's called an endothelial cell, and a natural process of that is using nutrition to build nitric oxide, which relaxes all your arteries and it prevents plaque from building up. And a lot of times, if you have high blood pressure, we all know that you have inflammation. You have probably constricted blood vessels and your sugar's too high, which is causing inflammation, and you're starting to build up plaque. Just reversing your lack of nitric oxide over a period of time can get rid of all of those things. And again, that is just a natural process every cell in your arteries has and must do to stay healthy. And just when you reach the age of around 40 or 50, most people don't produce it very much because their diets are poor and they don't have the proper nutrients. And so you can take a nutritional supplement, oftentimes just having a few amino acids in it, that will reverse that condition within a month. And then over a period of maybe 6 months, you can clean your entire cardiovascular system out. Now, why does that work? It only works because what you have done is restore a natural process that your body does, and it just starts to fail when you get older because of a lack of nutrients. So this whole system of homeostasis kicks in once again, and it tries to take care of all this excessive inflammation and all this tension in your arteries by doing something else as a stopgap measure. That's what homeostasis does. It's only worried about your present health at the exact moment that it's dealing with a situation. And in that exact moment, it knows you have excessive inflammation. It knows that you have, you need to repair all the cellular damage that's happening from that excessive inflammation. And usually the only way it can do that is through having produced a little bit more cholesterol to kind of go over there and fix the damage. Because cholesterol is used in the cellular process of repairing all your cells. And so the elevated cholesterol you have might just be there because you have too much inflammation in your arteries and your body's going through its only natural process it can do at the moment to try and fix it because you're low on other nutrients. Now, another thing involved in high blood pressure we talked about once, it was homeostasis, or not homeostasis, but homocysteine levels. I did a video on one of the tests that you can check for is homocysteine levels, meaning that you've eaten too much protein while lacking in certain vitamins needed to process it, and so an inflammatory chemical ends up in your system which inflames your arteries. And it's going to make the inflammation worse if you have low nitric oxide levels and if you have elevated blood sugar, because homocysteine in and of itself is an inflammatory marker. And then when you add sugar to it and elevated insulin, now you have, it's just like having a barbecue grill that you keep sprinkling lighter fluid on. It just stays hot and keeps burning. And so that's a process that's going on in most people all the time. But again, if you look at it and you look at the basis of it, here's something that may be considered a really chronic, life-threatening disease in Western medicine, but one that you can actually get a handle on yourself, and one that you can just find the right information from a nutritionalist or an herbalist and get some things to correct it, and then you won't require that medical intervention. Now, that medical intervention, I can tell you again, if you have really high blood pressure, may save your life, but in the end, it actually takes years off your life because it's one of the harshest drugs that you can ever take. But again, what is it doing? It's correcting a process in your body that only developed because your body was missing what it actually needed to function right. So your first goal, whenever you even think you're developing one of these diseases, is to find out more information on how your body actually works and how you can influence it to correcting itself. And that leads us back again to homeostasis. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about diabetes, you're talking about high blood pressure, we even talking about Alzheimer's. If you're reading the latest research on Alzheimer's, almost every process they're talking about that trips off into your brain is caused by a lack of nutrition over a long period of time, and then all the ensuing things that happen after that. It could be the lack of nutrition just creates the inflammation in your system. Could be you were born with certain genetics that create more inflammation in your brain. And then you have the whole toxic aspect of the fact that most people that eat a very suboptimal diet have a lot of inflammatory foods in it already that contain a lot of toxins. And so you wrap all this together and you end up with toxic levels of certain things in your body and in your brain. And your body can't handle that, and it starts creating all these processes to deal with it, and starts actually getting rid of neurons in your brain. And all these things, again, are your body's own way of trying to deal with the fact that it's lacking the proper nutrients and the proper substances to keep you healthy, so it kicks in another process that it thinks will be the best for you at that moment. And that can turn out to be getting rid of your neurons and ending up with Alzheimer's disease. So all of these things, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it comes back to how can you influence your own health, and how can you help create a situation in your body where you can heal from a chronic disease. I had a great example of this happening in my own life last summer, and I've shared this with you, not just the last summer, but it was the summer of 2016. And basically, I ended up with cancer, stage 3 cancer. And so I went through the process of changing my metabolism from one that metabolizes sugar to one that metabolizes ketones, or a water-soluble fat that your body can make out of its own stored energy, or out of things like MCT oil that you would consume. And so I basically allowed the system of homeostasis to kick in to actually clear dead and damaged cells out of my body by going on an intermittent fast every night, along with the new diet that I adopted. If you go do intermittent fasting, which is going for at least 12 hours every day without eating, and for me, I usually did it 16 hours, maybe 15 to 16, sometimes 18 hours without eating. And you might think that's huge, but it's really not. It's just deciding every day to be done eating by 6 p.m. and to not really eat anything until 10 a.m. the next day. And a good part of that is spent sleeping, and so it's not that difficult to do. And so, but what that does is it allows your bodies to go into a natural process of homeostasis, which is by not eating for 12 hours, your body kicks in a process to where it takes damaged old cells and just gets rid of them. And cancer is a damaged cell. It's a cell with a damaged metabolism that only runs on fermented sugar. And this is the reason why you go on a ketosis diet in the first place. You're robbing your body of sugar, which is used to feed cells. So I did that whole process, allowed my body to have at least 16 hours a day to clear out old damaged cells. And within the summer of 2016, I got rid of my stage 3 cancer. And I was cleared of it in September, after only finding out about it on Memorial Day. And, the required surgery that was supposed to go on with it, I didn't want to do. And so I just harnessed my body's own ability to heal itself by tapping into this process of ketosis, which is really just an alternative metabolism and allows your body's own homeostasis to kick in and regulate itself. And cancer's not supposed to be there. So I basically just starved it to death and choked it and got rid of it. And so it's a process that, I was fortunate enough to know about it and have a little help on how to actually get started with it. But the reality is, I just did it. It was something I did at home. I did it at home in my kitchen. And I did it at home just from taking some herbs for stress and taking some herbs along with it that are known to stop the inflammatory chemicals that feed cancer. But basically I starved it to death by feeding into my body's own natural process of how it heals itself. And this is what homeostasis is really all about. And what I hope you get out of this video is that it's really all about allowing your own natural processes to work.